I've been working really hard to get back to full health, and I feel like probably over these last couple of weeks is when I've probably started feeling my best. Obviously, my ankle kind of...
The Indiana Fever just dealt away the 10th pick in the 2026 draft for a guard they didn't really need. That move left Aaliyah Boston as the only true center on the roster. Then their coach publicly stated she wants Caitlin Clark handling the ball less. At Media Day, Clark answered every question with total composure, which somehow made her words hit even harder for the people running this team. Hidden within those calm responses are a few lines that should make both the front office and Coach Stephanie White genuinely uneasy. Do you think Stephanie White is the right coach for Caitlin Clark? Let me know in the comments below. Now let's go back to the 2 weeks leading into the 2026 WNBA draft, because the timing here really matters. My Raven Johnson appeared on the I'm Next podcast and said Caitlin Clark had broken her mentally during their Iowa versus South Carolina matchups. She explained that the backlash she faced online after Clark's wave-off gesture in the 2023 Final Four led to bullying and pushed her to the point of wanting to quit basketball altogether. That clip spread rapidly, so it was still fresh in everyone's mind when the Indiana Fever stepped up at number 10 and called her name. Fans immediately reacted, and it's not hard to understand why. Heading into that draft, Indiana's backcourt already featured Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, Tiara McCowan, Sophie Cunningham, and Lexi Hull, all competing for minutes. 5 guards. Clearly, the team's biggest issue wasn't at guard. It was in the front court, where they urgently needed size and someone who could stretch the floor to ease the burden on Aaliyah Boston. Analysts from Athlon Sports and Sports Illustrated both pointed out that the pick didn't align with the team's actual needs. So this wasn't just fans overreacting online. Johnson is known as a defensive specialist. She earned SEC Defensive Player of the Year honors at South Carolina. But she's undersized for her position and comes with real concerns about her offensive upside and ability to space the floor at the WNBA level. So Indiana drafted a player who doesn't address their biggest need into a backcourt that was already crowded. And this came just 2 weeks after she publicly described Clark as someone whose actions caused her significant emotional distress. Are Kelly Krauskopf and Amber Cox. Either didn't realize how that would look, or they didn't care. And neither explanation sat well with Clark's fan base, who quickly framed the move as the front office working against their own player. But Clark didn't stay silent about Johnson, and what she said completely shifted the narrative. During training camp, Clark highlighted Johnson's ability to bring the ball up the court and handle defensive pressure across all 94 feet. That means every possession where Johnson initiates the offense is one where Clark doesn't have to fight through a full-court press or trap before even starting the play. Over a 44-game season, while also being expected to score, facilitate, and close games, that matters a lot. Then Clark made another comment in a separate interview that most people overlooked. And she confirmed that the front office had asked for her input on both free agency and draft decisions throughout the offseason. In other words, she gave her approval for the Johnson pick. The move that some fans labeled as sabotage was one Clark herself apparently supported. As for Johnson, she arrived at training camp without any lingering resentment. She openly praised Clark, mentioned that she asked her countless questions about the offense in a single day, and addressed the situation directly. She said, "I think that's in the past, honestly. We're teammates now, and we have one goal. That's to win a championship." The locker room tension everyone expected hasn't appeared at all. So yes, from a positional standpoint, the Johnson pick doesn't look great on paper. That much is clear. But Clark clearly envisions a defined role for her, a ball handler and defender who can absorb real physical pressure and take some of that burden off Clark every time they bring the ball up the floor. That shifts the conversation away from whether Johnson belongs on this roster and toward a bigger issue, whether she's actually enough to correct what the Fever got wrong this offseason, because the backcourt was never Indiana's main problem to begin with. While the debate around Raven Johnson kept going, the Music Fever quietly moved through free agency and came out the other side without securing Aaliyah Boston a dependable front-court partner. The front office did bring in Monique Billings and Maisha Hines-Allen, but neither fits the mold of a stretch four who can shoot from deep and keep the paint from getting crowded. Or there were options available, players who could space the floor, give Boston meaningful rest, and hold up against bigger lineups when it actually matters. Indiana passed on those opportunities and continued stacking guards instead. Imagine Boston in a playoff series against a team rotating two capable bigs. She's forced into 35-plus minutes because there's no one behind her who can reliably hold things down. By the fourth quarter, she's exhausted. The opposing team recognizes it and attacks her relentlessly on every possession. That's not some exaggerated scenario. It's exactly what happens when, as one analyst bluntly put it, Indiana has no real backup for Boston, and right now, that's the path the Fever are on. Heading into training camp, Indiana's closest thing to a stretch four was Justine Pissett, a second-round pick out of Vanderbilt who signed a player development contract on April 17, 2026. Pissett stands out because she's not a traditional big. At 6 feet 4 inches with a 7-foot wingspan, she can shoot from the perimeter and run the floor instead of staying planted in the paint. Her production at Vanderbilt supports that profile, 11.1 points per game in her final season, and 42.2% from three on 6.6 attempts per game. That kind of shooting volume from a player, her size is genuinely valuable next to Clark. It pulls defenders away from the rim and opens driving lanes in a way a traditional power forward simply can't. The development contract also means she doesn't count against the salary cap, unless Indiana converts it into a standard deal, and she can appear in up to 12 games without losing that status. So the Fever aren't fully committing to her yet. Instead, they're essentially testing out a position they should have addressed with certainty. Here's where things take an interesting turn. During training camp, Clark mentioned that she prefers playing with teammates who can shoot and run, and she wasn't talking about the guards. Analysts quickly connected that comment to Pissett, and it's difficult to interpret it any other way. Clark understands exactly what kind of pieces she needs around her to maximize her game, and a mobile, floor-spacing big fits that blueprint perfectly. But a developmental player like Pissett is not the same as a proven veteran who can step into Game 5 of a playoff series and deliver. There's a clear gap between those two realities. And with the 11th and 12th roster spots still unsettled until just before the season begins, those final openings represent the front office's last real chance to address the front court issue they created by spending the offseason loading up on guards. Clark's remarks about shooters who can run don't sound like casual observations. They come across as a calculated, very public signal of what she wants those last two roster spots to become. Whether Kelly Krauskopf and Amber Cox are actually paying attention is an entirely different matter. The coaching situation only adds another layer of complexity to all of this. Stephanie White stepped in front of the cameras during training camp and outlined her vision for the 2026 Fever. Play at a faster pace, defend with more intensity, and distribute ball handling duties so Clark isn't bringing it up the full 94 feet every possession. White made it clear, saying, "The goal is to get Clark into the second or third action of a possession instead of having her initiate everything." She pointed to players like Raven Johnson as key pieces who can bring the ball up and start the offense before handing it off to Clark. On paper, that sounds like managing workload, but fans interpreted it as taking the ball out of Clark's hands, and that interpretation isn't off base. White's reasoning isn't irrational. A 44-game season is demanding, and if Clark is battling full-court pressure every possession, she's draining energy she'll need in late-game situations. White also noted that Clark is capable of playing both on and off the ball, which is accurate. So the idea of varying her role does align, at least in part, with how strong teams function. The issue is that White's defense-first system only works if the team can consistently generate stops. Right now, Indiana doesn't have the front court depth to support a true defensive identity. So, Clark is being asked to give up some control of the offense for a system the roster may not even be equipped to execute. Clark is at her most dangerous when she has the ball in space. She can pull up from 30 feet, forcing defenses to collapse and creating openings for her teammates. She thrives in transition, attacking before defenses can set, which is where she does the most damage. When the ball isn't in her hands, that gravitational pull weakens, and the offense loses its biggest advantage. You can't replicate that impact by shifting more ball handling to players like Tiara McCowan or Raven Johnson, because neither commands the same defensive attention Clark does simply by crossing half-court. Clark didn't openly challenge White, but she didn't pretend to fully agree either. At Media Day, she faced the cameras and stated plainly that she is the best transition player in the league. emphasizing that transition is where she excels and everyone knows it. That's not something you say casually at a team media session. It's a clear statement about how you expect to be utilized. She went a step further, referencing Stephen Curry and how the Golden State Warriors use him off the ball at times, not because he's less effective, but because his movement forces defenses to track him in entirely different ways. And that creates a different kind of pressure. Clark acknowledged that, over a long season, there are moments when playing off the ball makes sense, and she's willing to do that when it fits the situation. But that's not the same as endorsing White's approach. The Curry comparison shows she understands the concept and can apply it selectively. It doesn't mean she wants it to define the offense. Curry's off-ball success works because the ball is already in capable hands when he moves. White's system, on the other hand, asks Clark to hand off initiation duties to guards who don't create the same defensive strain she does just by being on the floor. Ultimately, White's scheme depends on Clark quietly accepting a reduced role in key moments. And Clark made it pretty clear at Media Day that she's not someone who operates quietly. What if you followed fan channels and hot take discussions this offseason? You might think Clark walked into Media Day and essentially called out her own front office. That's not what actually happened. The gap between what she said and how it's being portrayed is significant. Clark was composed, focused, and precise. She spoke about maintaining her health over the course of a full season. She also spoke about adjusting alongside new teammates as they learn each other's tendencies. She mentioned trusting the roster the front office assembled. On the surface, it sounds like a player handling things professionally, steady, composed, and not feeding into outside noise. Some fans interpreted that calmness as her being controlled or muted, as if the real Clark was hidden behind a PR filter. But when you isolate her exact words, a very different picture starts to emerge. She confirmed that the front office involved her in roster decisions, both in free agency and the draft. She emphasized her preference for teammates who can shoot and run, and she wasn't referring to any of the guards when she said it. She openly called herself the best transition player in the league without being prompted during a team media session. She even compared her off-ball usage to how the Golden State Warriors utilize Stephen Curry, which isn't something a passive player says just to avoid controversy. Clark isn't directly calling anyone out. She's not stepping up to the microphone and saying Stephanie White's system is flawed or that Kelly Krauskopf and Amber Cox mishandled the offseason. Instead, she's doing something more calculated, clearly laying out what she needs to perform at her highest level and letting observers connect the dots themselves. That approach doesn't give the front office anything to push back against publicly without making it seem like they're clashing with their own franchise cornerstone. What Clark is really doing is drawing a clear boundary between what she's willing to accept situationally and what she won't accept as a long-term identity. She's open to playing off the ball in certain moments. She made that clear with the Curry comparison. But she's not endorsing an offensive system built around her not initiating plays. Those are two very different ideas, and she communicated that distinction carefully enough for anyone paying close attention to catch it. The 2026 season ultimately comes down to one central question. Can White's defense-first philosophy and Clark's transition-driven style coexist without undermining each other? Clark's Media Day comments strongly suggest she's already evaluated that tension and chosen her stance. Music. She's not preparing to quietly adapt into a role that doesn't suit her strengths, and she's framed her position in a way that's difficult to challenge without seeming petty. Meanwhile, the roster concerns haven't gone anywhere. Boston remains the only true center. The 11th and 12th roster spots are still unfilled. White's system still expects Clark to scale back in ways she's made clear she doesn't fully embrace. Those realities haven't changed. A healthy Clark alongside Aaliyah Boston, Kelsey Mitchell, Lexi Hull, and Sophie Cunningham, with Pissett developing and 2 roster spots still open, does form a team capable of competing seriously in 2026. Clark's confidence at Media Day wasn't for show. It reflected a player who's handled enough pressure over the past 2 years to know which issues actually matter and which ones she can simply play through. So the frustration from her fan base heading into 2026 isn't manufactured. The front court still lacks reinforcements. The final roster spots remain undecided. And White's approach still asks Clark to adjust in ways she has publicly signaled she won't accept as a permanent framework. But Clark has already made her position clear. She's explained what she needs, confirmed her involvement in building this roster, and used the Curry example to outline exactly how she intends to operate within a system she doesn't fully agree with. At some point, something has to give. White's defensive system and Clark's transition-heavy style can't both dominate at the same time. One will bend first, and Clark has already made her bet. Do you think Stephanie White is the right coach for Caitlin Clark? Let me know in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything.